What's happening, Lance? Man, happy holidays to you. Merry Christmas Eve.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Well, I'm stick with happy holidays to everybody out there. I'm glad we're able to get one quick podcast in to recap this nice week that the Wolves just had. They played 4 games since we spoke last, so we're able to talk a little bit about some more positive things that we're seeing from these boys.
Yes, indeed, and thank you for including that. Happy holidays to you, no matter how you choose to celebrate this time of year, no matter what your religious or non-religious affiliations. However you choose to acknowledge this time of year is a time for gathering with family and friends and food and youth being out of school and all of that. We hope that you are enjoying your family time safely as we get ready to transition into another new year. You are tuned into the Coach and the Culture podcast, where we talk Timberwolves and a little bit of culture and other basketball stuff. I am Coach Frank. I'm joined as always by Mr. Lance Gardner, owner, proprietor of Yes Trees and co-host of the Coach and the Culture podcast. And as well, we got the super producer, Lloyd Leon Coop, like usual, making sure that by the time it gets to your podcast platform ears, it sounds good, it sounds neat, it sounds tight. Dare I even say, sultry. You're tuned in to the Coach and the Culture podcast. We're going to talk about the week that was for the Minnesota Timberwolves. 4 games on the slate. They had Miami Heat at Miami on Monday, followed that up with Wednesday, Thursday games at Philadelphia, and then back home for the Lakers. Both teams on the back-to-back there. And then they go to Sacramento last night and catch them on a home-and-home back-to-back, where Sacramento got a chance to get 2 in a row in their own home building, but the Timberwolves had other thoughts and plans for that idea. So we're going to recap the week that was for the Timberwolves and kind of just keep this one short and maybe talk about some players that are stepping up or doing some things within the context of the week that was, and then we'll go ahead and do Concerning Trend and Hope It Never Ends, our weekly segment where we talk about things that we're a little concerned about. That is a trend with the Wolves, and of course, there's not a whole lot when you're sitting there in first place at, I believe it is 22-6, and then we'll talk about what we hope never ends. Of course, those are the things that the Timberwolves are rolling with, and we want to see them keep rolling with them, and then we'll preview the week ahead, and that'll be our show today. So, Mr. Gardner, Miami Heat, man, with Jimmy Butler playing, he apparently decided he was going to take a bite out of the Wolves, and it probably didn't like the taste he got.
Yeah, nope. It seems to be like he only likes to play the Wolves in Miami. I don't know, something about the Target Center. Him and KG just don't like stepping foot in that building. So I don't know what it is, but it's a problem. But they went down
the weather this time,
right? They went down to Miami, and it's funny, I don't know the exact score that I predicted, but before they played that last podcast we did, I said, when I look at the schedule, I just look at Miami and I look at the Wolves, and it's just, we're at the point now where I just expect them to win these games. And I think I said it was like 111 to 107 or something like that, and it was awfully close, 112 to 108.
Yeah,
and that is a score where if you're a Timberwolves fan, that you love to see. They played defense. They held Miami to 108 points. They scored just enough, as we have already talked about many times, their offense being the one thing that kind of we're still waiting to see click and get everybody on the same page and up their points per game a little bit. But they went down there and played really good basketball from start to finish, as they were going to need, and held Jimmy Butler in check. Tyler Hero had a hot start, but after that, it was mainly all Timberwolves, and they stuck to their style as they've been doing this whole beginning of the year.
Yeah, and I think, they held Miami to 41 second half points, which is, absurd in the modern NBA to hold a team on an 82 point in a game pace. And Miami got buckets early, and, one of the trends that we've seen is that when the Timberwolves are struggling, when teams are able to score against them, some of the things that rear their heads up are turnovers, and rebounding. And Early, that was the case, especially with the turnovers in the Miami game. I think, they only had 13 turnovers for the game, but I think they had, 2/3, if not more of them in the first quarter or first quarter and a half of the game. And it's almost like they go into the locker room, and we've talked about this, where they kind of flip a switch and say, okay, we know what type of defense we need to play. Let's not help the other team out by turning the ball over or giving them rebounds. And they come out the second half and they clean up their ball handling and their possession control, and they clean up their boards and let their defense, their half-court defense, do the work, because when you're not turning the ball over, teams can't get run-outs. When you're not giving up offensive rebounds, teams can't get those kick-out threes, and so they're forced to deal with you in the half-court. And, I think it's been much talked about throughout the season that the Timberwolves half-court defense is the best in the NBA. And when Rudy Gobert is not in foul trouble and he's on the floor, and Mike Conley is on the floor for the offensive end of things, those two just seem to dominate games. And, Anthony Edwards puts up the numbers as he's supposed to, and Cat is one of the most efficient players, I think, to ever play the game, at least in the modern game. The way he scores numbers without taking a ton of shots, his efficiency is off the charts. And when those things are all clicking, Mike running the offense, Rudy handling the defense, Ant doing Ant stuff, and Cat doing Cat stuff, they're just super efficient. And I think that's what you saw in the second half of that Miami game, was just they dominated Miami playing the style of basketball that Miami usually uses to dominate opponents. So it was a great thing to see.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And they, after Miami headed to the game that it wasn't the Sixers after Miami. It was
the Sixers. Yep.
So so that was a game where we looked at that back-to-back Sixers and Lakers, and we both agreed that the game at the Sixers was going to be the more challenging of the two. Even though we played the Lakers back, on the second half of that back-to-back, and it was fitting. And it's something we're going to talk about a little bit more with aggressive and skilled bigs that are giving the Wolves some problems on the inside, and then match that with a 35-point night by Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid and Tyrese scored 86 of their 127 points, and nobody else on their team had over 10 points. Yes, Embiid shot a lot of free throws, but that's normal for him. And whether it's the refs or his playing style, either way, it's something that you have to account for every single game. And they really just dominated. Embiid, he's averaging 40 points and 10 rebounds over the past month. And Anthony Edwards said it in the post game. He said, I don't know how these dudes lose a game. And when you have someone that puts up 50 and 12, and he's almost averaging that, it's going to cause you problems. And that's what happened.
Yeah, there's a bit of a common theme going on with the Wolves having trouble with kind of a dominant, attack-minded, athletic bigs, which I guess you could say everybody in the league has problems with that. It's not like, when Zion decides he wants to dominate games, it's not like anybody else has an answer for him. And when Embiid decides he wants to dominate games, it's not like anybody else has an answer for him, at least in the regular season. I think when you get into the playoffs and you can game plan for a team, then it becomes a different story. And I think that's why you haven't seen Embiid have that big success in Game 7s. When Philly's been there and had Game 7 opportunities, or why Embiid and Philly haven't gotten to the NBA Finals. I think you can game plan for some of his tricks. You can game plan for how you want to force other players to beat you and what players you want them to be. And, on the Twitter feeds, there was a lot of talk about, well, why didn't Chris Finch double team Embiid? And, why did he let him play one-on-one? And why didn't he do this? And why didn't he do that? And I think what we have to keep in mind is that, the Philadelphia is an Eastern Conference opponent. The Wolves play them twice a year, once here, once there. They already got the win here. Yes, Embiid didn't play, but, you just play the games that are on the schedule, and whoever shows up for the opponent, that's who you try to beat. I just don't think that they're going to put that much effort into game planning for one Philadelphia game in December, and so it's kind of like you play it straight up and you see how that works out, and you challenge your players and you see how your players respond. And if it's good enough, it's good enough. And if it's not, it's not. But you're not going to spend a whole lot of time, losing sleep over how to guard Embiid for one game, in December, when the only chance that you'll possibly have to deal with him again is in the NBA Finals, especially when you're rolling, right? Especially when you have 4 games in a week. You have a conference opponent, the Lakers, coming up behind that, and then another big game against a conference opponent on the road, Sacramento behind that. You're just not going to put that much effort into showing a lot of what's in your defensive cachet, trying to figure out how to stop Embiid on one night. I think Tyrese Maxey getting off, especially during that stretch in the fourth quarter when Embiid was on the bench, was probably more disappointing than what Embiid did out there on the floor. I think you'd like to see Jaden do a little bit better job on Maxey, who's absolutely a tough cover. So, he also does he's done to a lot of other people in the league as well. I think more disappointing about the Philadelphia game from my standpoint was your 18 turnovers. We talked about it. What tends to get the Wolves when they're struggling? You got 18 turnovers and 22 assists. I thought Ant went into a little bit of hero ball mode in the second half. I think there was a big possession where the Wolves had cut the lead down to 6 or something like that, or 4 or 6, and he comes down and just takes a no-pass, pull-up 3, when it wasn't really a night where you would say that he was super hot from the three-point line.
Right.
He was 2 for 6 overall, 9 for 20 from the field, but that's just one of them possessions where you would have liked to see him be patient. Let's see what we can get better, because we can get that shot anytime we want. Knowing that you're having trouble getting stops, you have to maximize possessions when you're having trouble getting stops. And so there was I commented on Twitter, the Wolves didn't play horrible, but they didn't play well enough to beat Philly in Philly on a night when Embiid and Maxey have it going like that. And they kind of, Yep, go ahead.
One thing we haven't talked about at all is also the fact that Rudy Gobert had 2 fouls in the first 4 minutes of the game, and so he had to sit almost the entirety of the first half, which, if there's anybody in the league, and we're, like I said, we're talking a little bit about how it may be giving Rudy some fits when these bigs are being aggressive, but when you have to sit your all defensive player of the year caliber center against Joel Embiid, and allow him to get going, that also plays a huge factor in his 51 points. So you don't know what happens if Rudy's able to stay in the game and play the defense that we know he's capable of. That game could be completely different. I mean, that's an X factor in a game like that was eliminated early on. So there's a lot of things that happened that game, and as we always like to say, we nitpick. But at the end of the day, you can't win them all.
Right.
And it's a game that I don't think the Wolves are upset losing. It's not like they went and lost to I can't even
on the road. They didn't
think of a team. They didn't go to San Antonio and lose.
Right.
Or they didn't go to the Pistons and lose.
Right.
They lost to the 76ers and then, got right back on track the following night.
Before we move on, though, I do want to make a couple notes about the free throw thing with Embiid, because that was also what got them when they played at New Orleans, as Zion was able to draw early fouls on Rudy. And Chris Finch talked about, they asked Chris Finch, and I don't remember who it was that asked the question, but he was asked, what was kind of the difference in that second half when Philadelphia was able to make their run to kind of get some separation at the beginning of the fourth quarter. And Chris Finch flat out said, Rudy Gobert having to leave the game with foul trouble, And the thing about Embiid, because there's a lot of Twitter chatter about Embiid and his fouls and the way he draws fouls and the fouls that he gets from the officials. And if you watch him, he's a master at knowing what you have to do to defend him and using that against you. So he starts coming downhill at you, and he knows you have to brace yourself. And usually when you brace yourself, the first thing you do is you try to reach your hands out to prepare, for the impacts. Like if you're going to run into a wall, you're not going to run into a wall with your hands back. You're going to run into a wall with your hands out so you can stop, your momentum. And what he does is when you put your hands out to brace yourself against his attack, then he stops and he rips his arms up through yours and he gets those little touch fouls. And by the letter of the rule, they're fouls. I think the problem is very, 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 very few other players in the league get those same calls when they do similar things. And I think the person who gets the worst end of that stick is Anthony Edwards. If you're going to call those fouls on Joel Embiid, then you absolutely have to, call fouls against him when he fouls. And I'm speaking of when Anthony Edwards went to dunk on him, and that was totally not a straight up and down wall up by Embiid. He doesn't the call. But also, just in general, you have to give those calls to other players. You can't pick and choose, well, this player is going to get these little touch on the arm fouls when he creates that contact, but nobody else in the league is going to get it. That's an unfair competitive advantage. And I do think that, but I also think that in the playoffs, Embiid doesn't get those same calls, which is also why I think it's a disservice to Joel Embiid, because you're giving him that all season long, and then come playoff time, you're not giving him that call, and then he gets frustrated. And we talk about how Cat loses his head. Joel Embiid can also lose his head come playoff time. And so you're not really, you're going to get stat pad your regular season numbers, and it might get you a regular season MVP, but they're not going to give you those same calls in the playoffs, and you're never making the finals. So it's really not only a disservice to, the other players in the league for not getting those calls. It's a disservice to Joel Embiid because it doesn't prepare him for the way the game's going to be called in the playoffs. I think Anthony Edwards is much more prepared for playoff basketball than Joel Embiid because he doesn't get them calls all season long, and hence he goes out there and scores 32 points a game in the playoffs. So I did want to kind of mention, because there's so much Twitter chatter, and I know a lot of our listeners come from the Twitter sphere, about the way that Embiid gets those touch calls. And it's not so much that those aren't fouls, but the fact that nobody else in the league, especially nobody else on the Timberwolves, gets those same arm grabs and wrist slaps with any regularity. And Ant, more than anybody, gets his arms raked and his wrist slapped when he's going to the basket. And he does it with much more contact than the stuff they call for Embiid, and he doesn't get those calls. And so I think that's the more frustrating thing for Timberwolves fans, but just NBA basketball fans in general, as it relates to how officials officiate Joel Embiid. But as it relates to the Wolves, the same calls Embiid got was the same calls that Zion was getting, and both of those players dominated the game in a way that the Wolves' offensive inefficiencies in those games couldn't overcome. And I mentioned that on Twitter. I mentioned that Anthony Davis is going to pose some of the same problems. And I didn't know LeBron wasn't going to play at the time, but I'm really curious, kind of foreshadowing when we get into next week, if both LeBron and Anthony Davis play. I'm curious to see how Anthony Davis, probably getting similar calls and playing a similar way and putting up similar numbers, is also going to affect the game when you have LeBron playing with him like he didn't in the next game we're going to cover, the Thursday game against the Lakers.
Right. Those are all great points. Speaking of fouls with Anthony Edwards, I'm one of the people that really dislike when you complain about every single call that's called or not called. And as much as Anthony, I love him. I'm so glad we have him and everything that's positive. I'm starting over the past couple weeks, probably the past month, every time he goes to the basket, his arms are raised and he's looking for a call. And there's nothing that, is what it is. He's not the only person in the NBA that does it. When watching the game is something that I don't like seeing.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that it's twofold. I think that he's looking at the calls that other quote unquote superstars are getting and going, hey, I'm getting the same amount of treatment. Matter of fact, I'm getting more physicality and less calls. I also don't think it helps that Jaden MacDaniels, his buddy, gets called for the touch fouls that he gets called for. And so I think that, and keeping in mind Ant's 22, and so he's impressionable still. And then, of course, Cat and the amount of contact that he absorbs, because he doesn't get nearly a fraction of the whistle that guys like Embiid get as well. And I think the Timberwolves are handling it much better this year. And I think that also plays a role in their record, that they're just handling the fact that they don't expect those calls. And they're playing through it much better. And that's affecting outcomes, where I think, in the previous years, they let it bother them so much that it was affecting their focus. But I do agree that, the constant hey every time he goes up. Now, again, in his defense, it's difficult, because when you just watch Embiid go to the line 18 times and barely get fingers on him, it's hard. When you see the replays of the plays Ant's complaining about, and you see how often his arms get grabbed and there's no call, I can understand the frustration. They just going to have to keep playing through it. And I think, the more you win games, the more you start to get the benefit of the doubt. The less you complain, the more the narratives change on you in the officials' eyes. And so they're not there yet. They still have to prove it to the league. They have to prove it to the officials. They have to prove it to opponents. It's nice that they're 22-6 and tied for the best record in the league, but they are very much still in prove it land. They're still in
right
story.
I'm looking. I just did real quick look up. He's only averaging 5.5 free throws a game.
Yeah,
which for a superstar level is very low. That might be in the average range if you're looking at players that play the same amount of minutes as him. But for someone who is as aggressive as he is, and his just call it as it is, superstars get more calls, they get more protected, they want higher ratings, higher views, more points, all the above. And he's only getting 5.5 free throws a game, which is, like you're saying, low compared to everybody else that he's watching getting these foul calls, which in turn could aggravate you and cause your arms to go up. And hopefully, that, like you said, as he grows and gets older, we witnessed it with Cat, and he's done a great job of controlling his emotions this year and not doing the whining to the refs. And I don't, it's nowhere near Cat's level with what he's doing. Like I said, it's just that his arms are going up after every single drive, versus what we were dealing with Cat, which was just arguing and yelling at the officials and pouting and all the other stuff that he was dealing with throughout those years. But it's just something small that I, as a player, but I've never been in the NBA either,
right,
know that, it's not a good look, and nobody really likes to deal with that.
Yeah, and and I'll say this one last comment, and we can move on to the Laker game. Usually low man wins. Usually low man is going to get those calls. And one of the reasons Embiid gets those calls is because he's bringing his arms up from under people and then up through. One of the reasons Cat doesn't get a lot of calls is because he's usually not playing with great leverage. I think he's done a better job this year of playing with leverage and body control. But Ant's always low man. And so that's, I think, another one of the frustrating things for Ant is he's always coming up and through. And they rake his arms a lot. And he doesn't get those calls. And I think that, to his defense, that every other key player in the league is getting those calls. And he's just not. And so, it'll come, but I understand his frustration. Lakers.
So they come back, second game, back-to-back, back home at the Target Center. As we talked about, the environment, unfortunately, I wanted to actually get to the game, but I didn't make it happen, and I can only imagine what the environment was like.
They broke
Yep. I figured that some along those lines, as they're breaking other records with their actual play as well. The city is loving it right now.
Yep.
I don't know why, but like us, we'll take it as we state. But it just seems like every marquee game seems like somebody's deciding they want to sit against us. And this time it was LeBron. And it is what it is. Man's, 40 years old?
Yeah, he's 38, I believe, 39, 40, something like that. Year 22, I believe it is. 21, 22. In his defense, they had a pretty, he put in a lot of work trying to keep his team in it in Chicago the night before. When he plays, his user rate is really, really, really high. for somebody his age, and he plays a lot of minutes, and he has to, because that team, as you very well saw, is not competitive without him. And I think they came in on a 4-game losing streak. I think we pushed it up to 5. And so, I can't really blame LeBron for taking a night off. The other thing is LeBron sometimes takes a night off just to be like, you know what, I just played 40 minutes last night and dropped, crazy amount of points and rebounds and assists. And
y'all go do something.
Yeah, y'all go earn your money. Jeez.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. It's just, as a someone who's loving watching the Wolves right now, it's just something you hear in the background. Well, they didn't play LeBron, and they didn't play Kyrie, and they didn't it's just always nobody, is it real? They're not. Every time they play somebody, one of their all-stars is not playing. And to be the best, you got to beat the best. So that's the only reason I say that. But they came home, sounded like what you just said. The Target Center was rocking. They had all 5 of their starters had over 10 points. They had 40 assists. They in every single stat category, they won the game. Shooting percentage and 3-point percentage was a little bit lower, but all the extra stuff, all the things that require extra hustle and effort, they took the cake in. And it was a fun game to watch. I think that they let them hang around a little bit, which, we've talked about making sure that you keep the foot on the gas, on the pedal. But I think they were up. They only won by 7, but I think they were up 16 in the fourth quarter or something along those lines.
Yeah, and tried to shoot the Lakers back into it.
Yeah, and I also saw Ant, which is fine. He looked to be like he was having a little fun towards the end of the game, and it seems like when Ant decides he's going to have fun instead of being professional, the whole team then deals with his decisions. Because same with, I think it was actually the Lakers game. He tried to, it was Sacramento last night, but a lot of one-on-one, a lot of ISO stuff. And when he does that, he does seem to turn the ball over quite a bit when he's going without a specific intention and he's just looking to have fun out there and score. It seems like he gets stripped a lot and is just doesn't look the greatest.
Well, yeah, he's still 22, and Chris Finch was frustrated. We'll get to the Sacramento game in a second, but Chris Finch was definitely frustrated with him. He called in the media timeout and just kind of gave him a look. And Ant tried not to look at it. As a player, and when your coach is mad at you and you just don't even want to look at him. But the thing about the Lakers game, and we've talked about this on the podcast, is I still say that Boston Celtics win here at home created a baseline for when we need to turn it up and put a team away, or when we need to turn it up and put our stamp on a game. That's what they turn to. They know what it looks like, what it feels like, what the concentration level is, because they did that for 48 minutes here at home against Boston. And so, the Lakers game, they kind of let the Lakers hang around. It wasn't a super clean game, but when they need to, they turn it up on defense. And, Mike Conley was asked, I want to say it was Britt Robson interviewing him in the locker room, but he was asked, how about the level of energy that it takes to play defense the way that they do. And you and I talked about it on the podcast a few weeks ago, how they're not always going to play 48 minutes of that Boston Celtics game level defensive intensity. That's impossible to ask over the course of 82 games. But when you can turn it up for 12 minutes or 16 minutes or 15 minutes or even, 9 minutes of a fourth quarter, when you have that switch that you can go to when you need to, sometimes that's enough. And against a LeBron-less Lakers team coming stumbling in here on the back-to-back, and even though the Wolves also had a back-to-back in Philly, I think it's a very different feeling when you're the Lakers coming in on a losing streak and losing at Chicago, who's up and down, versus the Wolves coming in here having lost for the first time in like 4 games, and you're coming back home and there's just a different vibe. and the Wolves flipped that switch when they needed to. There's a lot of talk, obviously, because, D'Angelo Russell and Mike Conley are going to be forever linked in Wolves and Lakers lore because of the trade last year and how much Mike Conley has meant to this team. And I think, the difference is in the stats. Mike Conley, 16 points, 8 assists, 1 turnover, 6 of 9 shooting. Super efficient, 4 for 6 from 3, super efficient, not doing anything to put his team in bad situations, not being selfish, only 9 shots taken. Then you look at D'Lo, 17 points, so 1 more point, 8 assists, so the same amount of assists, 19 shots. That is ultra inefficient when you score 17 points on 19 shots, and 4 turnovers. And that, in a nutshell, is the difference, I think, between the Wolves this year, especially when you consider the Mike and Rudy relationship, and the Wolves last year, when you consider how D'Lo manages teams and the D'Lo-Rudy relationship. So I think that game is, indicative of why the Wolves are 22-6. And, you said it earlier, you just don't enjoy watching D'Lo play. And, of course, immediately after that game, Darvin Ham makes an announcement that he's moving D'Lo to the bench, so, of course, Wolves fans got a kick out of that and that up on Twitter. And, D'Lo's comment that he felt held back when he was playing for Minnesota. So, I guess the Warriors held him back, the Wolves held him back, and now the Lakers are holding back. Because it's never him,
Right.
The self-awareness is something that's always been a little short with D'Angelo Russell. So
real quick on that note, I really, if you watch basketball, you played basketball, and you have a little background knowledge, you really understand how important Mike Conley is. Yeah. If you look at just highlights and all the above, although he's probably made a few highlight threes in clutch time, but you may not really understand just how important he is to this team. What do you think the Wolves' record is if they don't have Mike Conley running your point guard right now? And I'm not even going to say, you could insert D'Lo into this equation, or you could just say any other point guard in the league, because Mike Conley is one of one. And so where do you think the Wolves sit if Mike Conley is not on the Wolves roster right now?
That's hard to say because it would depend on who the other point guard is, so that's hard to say. They're sitting at 22-6. I say that Mike Conley just being Mike Conley versus any other point guard in the league, which is, again, it's hard to say because, are you talking about John Morant? Are you talking about De'Aaron Fox?
I guess my thought process is if we don't get Mike Conley, there's no free agent. The only free agent point guard out there was Dame Lillard. So we're just going to assume we wouldn't get him in any case.
He was traded.
Sorry. Yes. We're going to assume we would have no all-star quality point guard on our roster. And
this is going to sound odd, but I think the other point guard that would have them in a similar position, and this is going to hit people out of left field, but I really think that this particular guard style of play would bode well with this team.
Can I guess it?
Go ahead.
He was a free agent, or we would have to trade?
He was a free agent.
I was going to say Fred VanVleet, but I don't think he was a free agent.
Yeah, he was a free agent. He signed with Houston as a free agent.
Was it him?
That's not who I was going to say, but that's a good one. I think that you would get somewhat similar results. I don't know that he's as good of a offensive game manager as Conley is, but he might bring you some other things. But I was going to actually say Dennis Schroeder.
That's a good one.
Dennis Schroeder. And the reason why I say that, and I'm really thinking of how he managed that Germany team in the FIBA, but that kind of lower usage guard that can be devastating in pick and roll game, that can be a quality defender, just good enough of a defender when need be, and can make some clutch shots when he's wide open. So and who also is a decent game manager. I don't know, if Mike Conley's worth 8 wins, maybe Dennis Schroeder is worth 4 or 5 wins. Maybe Fred VanVleet is worth 4 or 5 wins. If you're looking at point guards that are kind of on that caliber, but I don't think there's many that you could put on this team that can have the impact that they've had on Rudy, as well as the leadership and kind of that veteran, Paul, dare I say, ish.
And you look at, I don't watch Fred VanVleet play enough to know his leadership skills, but that out of anything, that's the part that I think people are missing, because he's, Mike Conley he's not flashy. He doesn't need to be in the center. He doesn't need limelight. He doesn't need any of that stuff. But the amount of information and knowledge and just awareness that he's putting on this team is huge. And you said 8 games that you think Mike Conley might have won us, or was the key factor of where we're at right now. I actually am going to say 10. I think that depending again on who the point guard would have been, there's some changes in there, but I think that without a Mike Conley style point guard, you're then putting all your baskets on Anthony Edwards in all phases of the game, with Cat kind of doing what he's doing, but then you put a lot on Anthony Edwards. And I think right now Anthony Edwards is capable of doing a lot, but he also doesn't have a ton of responsibility besides to just be himself and then close out games.
Well, he doesn't have to manage the game.
Right. And that's a lot of responsibility that, as a 22-year-old who's trying to learn this league and become the best that he can be, he doesn't have to worry about all of those other things that Mike Conley is taking off of his shoulders.
Well, I think for Chris Finch is just as big. That there's a lot that Chris Finch doesn't have to worry about. When Conley's your point guard. Fred VanVleet's a little bit younger. He's an NBA champion, so he knows what it takes to get there. He's been there and done that. He played a key role on that Toronto championship team. That's why one of the reasons why Houston gave him so much money. And he's a little bit younger. But I just think that when you have the offensive weapons that the Wolves have around them, and you have kind of the volatility and the personalities that they have around them, when you're talking about Rudy, Cat, and Jaden, I just don't think you can discredit Mike's personality. And then also, for those who have not followed Mike Conley's career, I was a Mike Conley fan when Mike Conley was at Ohio State with Greg Oden. And Greg Oden got all of the accolades, but Mike Conley made that machine run. And so Mike Conley has always been a winner, and he's always been a dog. And I think sometimes people look at somebody's stature and they underestimate their mental fortitude and their competitive fire. And if you watched Mike Conley going all the way back to Ohio State, he hasn't changed much in terms of his approach to how he plays basketball. Mike Conley always been that dude. I think Minnesota fans are just realizing it because, if you're a casual basketball fan, you didn't watch Mike Conley at Ohio State, right? But Mike Conley been that dude for his entire career. And his dad was that dude, and his mom was that dudette. Like, Mike Conley comes from athletic greatness, So I don't think that people can underestimate, how much that this isn't like he's not doing anything other than what he has always done and has always been.
And it's funny because even as the Timberwolves are freaking first in the West and tied for first in the league, he still flies under the radar. Like, there's nothing that he could do unless he decides he's going to, he's capable of, averaging 22 points a game and 9 assists and just having the ball in his hand the whole game. He's capable of doing that. And it's funny because it just tells you, what people look for and what the league is really driven by, because you have someone who we're talking as a 10-game winner for the best team in the league. And unless you know basketball, you're not really following what he's really doing out there.
And he's that guy who's always been, the whole time in Memphis, he was always that guy where, he could have been an all-star, but, X player, this player, that, Damian Lillard, Steph Curry, the players that were in the point guards that were in the West, he was always that odd man out, but he was always like, would have been the next man in, right?
Right.
And so and then he got the one All-Star nod, of course. So he's always been, right on the cusp. Really, he's always been an all-star player. He's always been an all-star player. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, who's always just kind of been the odd man out by the greatness that has been the guards in the Western Conference throughout his career. And so, and he's playing like that, like you said, he could be putting up all-star numbers if that was his role, still at 36.
Yeah.
So that just his greatness. Let's move on.
Real quick, if you weren't a Mike Conley fan, maybe now just us talking about it, you'll understand what he's really doing, and maybe we'll up his jersey sales by 1 or 2.
Man, and everything's on YouTube. Go back to YouTube and check out Mike Conley at Ohio State. If you think if you never really quite understood or understand, like when Mike Conley was talked about in trade rumors is coming here, and there were people like, we don't want Mike Conley. He's washed up. He's this, that. There were people that were talking that on Twitter. And I was like, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. That's for certain.
Yeah. Turned out to be one of the best things.
He had left in the tank. You were like, okay, yeah, we got ourselves one.
All right. Okay, so yeah, we were moving on here to the last night game, one of the best games that the Timberwolves have played this year, in Sacramento against the Kings.
Yeah, we keep saying, I feel like once a week we say this is the Timberwolves' best win, or this is the Timberwolves' best road win, or they just keep raising the bar for themselves. And I kind of felt like I predicted it a little bit on Twitter when it was determined that Cat was not going to play. I truly feel like Cat could have played last night. I felt like this was Chris Finch and the organization's way of buying a game off for Cat, because they actually match up better with Sacramento without Cat than they do with Cat. And when Sacramento came here and hung the only loss that the Wolves have had this year on them in Target Center, a lot of that was Harrison Barnes early, kind of giving Cat fits. Harrison Barnes is not a great matchup for Cat. Cat has been outstanding defensively this year, and he's played all types of power forward. But as players, we all have run into that guy that something about what they do just doesn't mesh with what we do. We've all had that guy. We had the guard that is just like, man, this dude, why does he always kill me? And I just think Harrison Barnes is a difficult matchup for Cat at the 4. On the other hand, Harrison Barnes is tailor-made for Kyle Anderson. And so I felt like, people were like, oh, we got to go into Sacramento without Cat. And I was like, I kind of feel like this was very strategic by the Wolves coaching staff to buy Cat a couple extra days of rest and keep him away from a matchup that's problematic. If you're going to beat Sacramento in Sacramento, you cannot let Harrison Barnes get going. And you can't let Trey Lyles get going. And I felt like Kyle Anderson's a great matchup to not let Harrison Barnes get going, and he did it. Harrison Barnes got some buckets late, but, in the fourth quarter, who would you rather have getting a bucket or two, Harrison Barnes or De'Aaron Fox, which we'll get to in a little bit here. And then in the mid portion of the game, now Naz Reid kept now I'm drawing a blank, Lyles out of the he kept him out of the man, why am I drawing Trey Lyles? Goodness gracious. Drawing a blank on the man's name. He kept Trey Lyles from getting going in the middle portion of the game. Again, Trey Lyles got some buckets going early, and it's going to look like Trey Lyles outplayed Naz Reid because, he goes 4 for 8 and he has 10 points. A lot of that was, again, in the fourth quarter, he got going, hit a couple threes, hit a 3 in a couple buckets, and you kind of go, well, who would you rather have taking those shots in the fourth quarter, Trey Lyles or De'Aaron Fox, right? But in the middle portion of the game where the Wolves were kind of controlling the game, that middle stint, Naz Reid got all 6 of his points and really affected Trey Lyles and kept him from doing much, right? And so during Sacramento's late push to come back, yes, Harrison Barnes got some buckets, Keegan Murray got some buckets, Trey Lyles got some buckets. In that fourth quarter, baby, they gave up a few more points than you would like to see them give up in the fourth quarter. But when it's all said and done, they still hold Sacramento under 100 points because you hold De'Aaron Fox scoreless, you hold Sabonis scoreless in the fourth quarter, and that's kudos to Rudy and kudos to Jaden with a little help from Nikhil. And we can talk. I want to talk about that a little more in detail after I get your thoughts on the game overall. But I just felt like I texted on Twitter. I said if Nasri, Jaden MacDaniels, and Anthony Edwards are making shots, I feel like the Wolves have a good chance of winning this game. Nas didn't get many shot attempts, which is rare. But Jaden MacDaniels and Anthony Edwards absolutely made shots. The other thing that we talked about on Twitter a little bit was Kyle Anderson needing to find his offensive game if he's going to play in lineups without Cat. And Kyle Anderson absolutely found his offensive game. And so the end result is, a double-digit victory on the road, holding Sacramento under 100 points without Karl Anthony Towns. And I just think that was really strategic by Chris Finch and the Wolves coaching staff to make sure that they matched up in a way with Sacramento that counteracted Sacramento's strengths.
Mm-hmm. And if that's what they did, then that's, more kudos to Chris Finch and all the people that say, for whatever reason, and I still could never imagine why we would want to get rid of him already, but to the people that said he should go bye-bye. Overall thoughts on the game. Like I said, I personally think even without Karl Anthony Towns, this is one of the best Timberwolves wins of the entire season. Huge emphasis on keeping them under 100 points. I mean, this is a high-scoring, high-quality offense in Sacramento. Mike Conley, after the game, was talking with a reporter and said that first thing that came out of his mouth was, we still have so much more that we haven't even tapped into yet.
Yeah.
And I think we've said that. I mean, we've said that there's still some kinks. There's still games where it's only one of the two, where it's only Cat or only Ant, and there's not a whole lot of games where they're getting two, Cat and Ant, or Ant and Jaden. Jaden really is the piece that we really wanted to come out. I think we talked about preseason him averaging like 18 points a game or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Which he's averaging in his last three, by the way.
Right, and as he's getting his feet back under him and back into the rotation, he's playing really good basketball. The 3-point shooting overall for the team is so. Specifically, Anthony Edwards, who we know is a much more capable 3-point shooter than what he's been averaging as of late. I think he's shooting around 32% from three right now. Just looking at it really quickly,
falling off a little
37%, which isn't terrible.
No, but where he needs to be. I mean, we'd like to see him closer to 38.5, 39, but for the types of threes that he takes, 37% isn't bad at all, because it's not like he takes a lot of wide open, easy threes.
Mm-hmm. But the whole point in saying all that is that the Wolves still have another level to them. They have a lot of talent on their roster. As we've talked about, the depth is there. I think the Shake Milton and the Troy Brown Jr. I mean, Troy Brown only played 3 minutes last night, which is very interesting. And
I think that's one part of it was matchups. And two, the other part of it was that I think Chris Finch knew that they got 2 days off. And so generally when you have that time off, you're going to play more of a playoff style rotation. You're going to ride your starters for heavy minutes as long as nobody's in serious foul trouble. Mm-hmm. And that's what he did. There just wasn't a lot of minutes for Troy Brown last night based off of matchups, I felt like, for the Wolves. I think he wanted to keep Kyle Anderson on the floor as much as possible. I think he wanted to keep Nikhil on the floor, as much as possible, because you're dealing with De'Aaron Fox. I think the guys you can't let hurt you when you're playing Sacramento are Herter, Kevin Herter. You can't let, Duarte get some threes off. You can't let Trey Lyles hurt you. You can't let Harrison Barnes hurt you. Malik Monk didn't play for whatever reason on the second night of that back-to-back. He must be injured. So
yeah, he didn't play. But just looking at that, with you saying that, talking about this is more, kind of what the playoff numbers, minutes are going to look like. The Wolves put up 110 points without Karl Anthony Towns, and so if you replace Cat with Kyle Anderson and you just assume he's going to get his average, and let's just say he gets even under his average and scores 20 points, and Naz Reid he's averaging, I think, 12.
Yep.
Maybe even a little higher. So
yep.
If you insert those Cat back into the roster and Naz Reid gets 2 more shot attempts, which is probably, I would say that's very plausible. This looked like a game where if everyone plays the way they played last night with Cat back in the lineup, that's championship caliber team right there.
Yeah,
because you're looking at about 122 points. The defense was obviously there, and we only shot 30% from the 3-point line, which as a team I think we're shooting 38%. So we're even low on that. But if you look at the stats, the box score of this game, and look at the numbers for what was produced, that is kind of what we're looking for when we're talking about the Wolves being at their potential level. Obviously, again, inserting Cat into that lineup.
Yeah, the scores were down, so that's something you'd love to see. Only 12 turnovers. That's, an acceptable number, especially when you measure that up against 31 assists. So when you got 30 assists and 12 turnovers as a team, you didn't get killed on the boards. We talked about, and they've done much better lately on the boards. You give up only 8 offensive rebounds. You collect 7. You win the overall rebounding battle. You shoot 51% from the field. We talked about how suffocating the defense was. I want to talk about something you mentioned briefly, Jaden MacDaniels. And so a couple things that have happened as he started to find his rhythm and his stride. They went 3-1 on the week, and they had 2 games back-to-back, actually, where they had 5 starters in double figures. That didn't happen in the Philly game, but they had 3 players with 20 points or more against Philly. And then Rudy Gobert was 1 point away from having 5 starters in double figures in the Miami game. So not only is Finch starting to tighten up the rotation and settle in on who's going to play and get some routine for those guys on a nightly basis, but you're starting to see that across the board production in that starting group. And Naz, I think it's rare for him to only get 4 shots. But again, I feel like all 6 of his points were at a time in the game where the Timberwolves kind of, he kind of dominated that Trey Lyles matchup with those 6 points in that middle portion of the game. And so I thought that was very subtly huge points. Even Shake Milton, he only had 5 points in 14 minutes, but when Sacramento tied the game up and made a run and the fans are going crazy and they got a little momentum, and all of a sudden Shake Milton hits that big corner 3 and the Wolves immediately go on a run right back at him after that in the second quarter. So, I think that you're starting to see the role players kind of fill into their roles and the starters fill into their role. And I think one of the most key components, because it can't be understated that you held De'Aaron Fox, who was, the most prolific fourth quarter player in the league last year, to 0 points. And then on top of that, Gobert holds Sabonis to 0 points in that fourth quarter. And you can say, well, Sacramento was playing on a second half of a back-to-back. Yeah, but it's a home, 2 back-to-back games at home. And so,
and they had, they didn't have Malik Monk, but they had, and he is a huge part of their team.
But yeah, we have Karl Anthony Towns. To me, that's a wash.
I think that's not a wash. I think they actually had the upside on that. But,
well, yeah, but I'm saying they can't use the excuse, oh, well, we had Malik Monk. Yeah, well, we had Karl Anthony Towns. So I ain't trying to hear that.
Right. But no, those are numbers. Jaden MacDaniels. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I want to get to this point because we talked about it in the preseason podcast about how, Jaden got that big contract, and the number one way he's got to earn that contract is by staying on the floor. And the way he stays on the floor is you're going to have to sacrifice some buckets early so that you can be on the floor and be as aggressive as you can possibly be late. right? And there's, they go on a 3-1 week where you win at Sacramento, at Miami, home against the Lakers. But you look at Jaden MacDaniels' minutes, he plays 41 minutes against Sacramento, right? Huge minutes for Jaden MacDaniels chasing De'Aaron Fox around. He plays, he plays 36 minutes against the Lakers. He turns around against Philadelphia. I believe he played, 38 minutes against Philadelphia. His low-minute game of the week was 30 minutes against the Miami Heat. And he's averaging 18 points a game in his last 3 when Jaden MacDaniels is not fouling early, which allows him to defend to the maximum of his aggressiveness and ability late. I think as the Wolves continue to progress through the season, if that can be a trend, these fourth quarters are going to belong to the Wolves. Because if Jaden MacDaniels goes into a fourth quarter with 3 fouls only committed, he's going to be a nightmare for whoever is the alpha guard scorer on the other team. And you saw that play out in the Miami game. You saw that play out in the Sacramento game. You saw that play out in the Lakers game. I mean, he did foul out of the Miami game, but after 30 minutes of play, and when he fouled, by the time he fouled out, the damage was kind of already done. The Sacramento game, he committed, I don't think he even made it to 5 fouls. No, he committed 4 fouls in the Sacramento game. So that's where you want him to be. He's going to commit some fouls, but if he can get to the fourth quarter and only have committed 3 fouls, they're going to be a problem. They're going to win fourth quarters, and they're going to have more fourth quarters where they shut down guys like De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis when Jaden MacDaniels doesn't have to worry about not committing a foul to stay in the game. And then you combine that with his offensive production. And when you talk about what's out there for the Wolves in terms of how they can improve, that is a major step of improvement if Jaden MacDaniels can get into fourth quarters with only 3 fouls committed.
There's a great point. Not only the limited amount of fouls for him to be more aggressive on that end, but if you don't have to exercise as much energy, come third quarter, fourth quarter, when I would only assume at this point in the year that the Wolves are still in the game. You have, a whole half of not having to exert all of your energy and saving that up for the second half of the game is huge. Yes, also on top of limiting the amount of fouls to let him be aggressive, he also is going to have a little more energy on the defensive end, second half of the game. And one more thing on top of that, if you're not exerting all your energy, picking up fouls, getting frustrated early on in the game, now you have the ability to do a little bit more on the offensive end too, which Jaden MacDaniels over the past, I think, is his third year, fourth year now? Over the past 3 years until this year, his main focus has always been defense. And that's what the Wolves have needed him to do against the other team's best player, because they were still figuring things out. And that alone was keeping them in basketball games. And so now that they have some other things for them to stay in games, and it's not just strictly on Jaden MacDaniels shutting down the other team's best player, now you can find other ways to incorporate him in the offense, which another reason why hopefully their uptick in scoring goes up as he gets back into the swing of things.
Yeah, and his shooting is real. 2 years ago, before last season started, I was talking with Dane Moore during his preseason live fan podcast show, and we talked actually a little bit after the show, and I told him that I felt like Jaden MacDaniels was going to be a high 30s, low 40% 3-point shooter, especially out of those corners. And Dane was like, I'm not so sure. Well, last year he shot 40%, and this year he's shooting around 40%. And the Dane Moore shooting is real.
The Dane Moore,
the Dane Moore shooting. Oh my God! I'm sure Dane was like, "Yep, my jumper's fire." The Jaden MacDaniels shooting is real. The Jaden MacDaniels scoring is real. Ben Beacon was talking about how the Wolves brass were saying that they felt like he could be a little bit more of a shot creator, and he was uncertain about that. And I don't ever, I keep my opinions to myself a lot of times when it comes to what I hear from other podcasts, but one of the things that grates me is when guys draw opinions about these guys that are 21, 22 years old, when you know they're still developing. And anybody who knows about Jaden MacDaniels from high school on up talked about his offensive abilities and how he's playing a role for the Wolves, but he's got a lot in his offensive bag. And I just think over the next year to 2 years, you're going to see Jaden MacDaniels become a 20-plus point a game scorer on a night in and night out basis, along with the defense, because it's really clear this dude's got a lot in his bag. Both hands, mid-range, gets to the basket, and can shoot the three.
Yep, I agree with all those things. I am going to let you finish this out with the maybe you'll talk a little bit about what they got coming up this week, and then concerning trends and hope it never ends. But I have to get up out of here, so I'm going to leave the last portion of this podcast to you. And I again hope to all the viewers that you guys have a happy holidays and enjoy time with family and loved ones and friends, which is really all that matters at the end of the day. So take the time, appreciate it, and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you for joining. As always, that's Lance Gardner, proprietor of Yes Trees. So if you need your trees trimmed or chopped down, removed, whatever it is, please go to @YesTrees, YES TREES, and have Lance come and service your tree maintenance even throughout the winter. So yes, and we'll be back live next week with you, Lance, I believe. I think are we still planning on recording a video on Saturday next week?
I'm down as long as the dream shop allows us.
All right. So, man, have a happy holidays. Enjoy the family. Enjoy this last Christmas without having to buy gifts for your own child.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you finish this fourth quarter clutch. Time for you to lock in.
All right, my man. Take care.
All right, peace.
Concerning trends and hope it never ends. Wow. Well, the Timberwolves don't have a whole lot of concerning trends. As you know, when you're sitting at 22-6, there's not a lot going wrong. But I do have a few. We usually try to do 3 concerning trends and 3 hope it never ends. So the first concerning trend that I'm going to have is the alpha bigs that they have had to face and what they have done to the Wolves. Zion goes for 35, Embiid goes for 50, and Anthony Davis goes for 31. Anthony Davis, I think, shot the low number of free throws against the Wolves front line, which was 9. I believe he went 8 for 9 from the free throw line. And Zion and Joel Embiid feasted against the Wolves from the free throw line. And when Rudy gets early foul trouble, it changes the tenor of a game, and that's a concerning trend. When Rudy has to go to the bench early in first quarters with 2 fouls, it just changes everything for the Wolves on the defensive end of the floor. It changes the rhythm that they play with on offense. And so that is a bit of a concerning trend, is when they go up against teams that have alpha bigs. That's been a problem for the Wolves. It's given them 2 of their 6 losses. And so that's something to watch out for, because, you know, Zion is likely going to be in the playoffs. Anthony Davis is likely going to be in the playoffs. So we'll have to keep an eye on that particular concerning trend. Concerning trend number 2 is ball control. And I only say this because when the Wolves lose, it generally has a lot to do with the turnovers. And so going back to the one game they lost this week, the Philly game, 18 turnovers. And sometimes Cat is a big culprit. Sometimes Ant is a big culprit. Lance had just mentioned earlier in the Sacramento game, even though the Wolves did not have a high number of turnovers, Anthony Edwards, out of the 12 turnovers that the Wolves had 5 of them. And a lot of those turnovers are dribbling into traffic unnecessarily, trying to force his way in between 2 and 3 people. They're stripping, they're slapping down. Maybe he's not getting calls that he deserves, that other superstars get, but also is this just the decision-making of deciding to drive into 3 people when you can get off the ball early, knowing that you have Mike Conley, Jaden MacDaniels, guys out there. Kyle Anderson was making plays in his own way. You have other guys that can make plays, and so I'd much rather have him have 3 turnovers and 12 assists than to have 5 turnovers and 10 assists. Or if he doesn't get the assists, let's get the hockey assists and up the team total up by a couple of assists. And then, maybe we have 33 team assists and only 10 turnovers. I know it's a minor thing and I'm nitpicking, but the high number of turnovers by Cat and Ant and the way they get them is a little bit of a concerning thing. I know they're high volume players. High volume players are going to turn the ball over. Their job is to press the issue, but I still would like to see a little bit better decision making, because in those games like at Philly, where you have to be really clean, you can't afford to turn the ball over 18 times as a team. The last concerning trend, I'm really reaching to try to find concerning trends right now. And I'll repeat something that I said last week's show, was just the little minor injuries, the nicks and bumps here and there. Ant goes down with a little nick and bump. Jaden's been in and out of the lineup with nicks and bumps, whether it's an ankle, whether it's a calf. And all of a sudden, Cat misses the Sacramento game because the knee's bothering him a little bit. And we'll see, the Timberwolves haven't always been forthcoming on the injury report. They make it seem like it's no big deal. And they're kind of giving the hint like he's only going to miss a game, which was the Sacramento game. And we'll have to see if Cat's back in the lineup when they go to Oklahoma City on Tuesday. But that would be my last concerning trend, is just the little nicks and bumps. I do believe if Cat is back in the lineup when we go to Oklahoma City on Tuesday, I'm doubling down on my theory that he probably could have played against Sacramento, but I think Chris Finch looked at the matchups. He looked at the way the last game played out. He looked at how much running around Harrison Barnes made Cat do, and kind of went, this is a good time to buy you an extra couple days, get you 4 or 5 days rest on that knee, and bring you back feeling a little bit better against Oklahoma City. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. Hope it never ends. The Wolves right now, I believe, are tied for the best record on the road in the NBA. I hope that never ends. We've talked about this 16-game stretch, which I believe the Wolves are 5-2 in right now. And we talked about, well, if they go 8-8 in that stretch, it's a positive. It's not a negative to go 500 during such a difficult stretch. Well, right now they're 5-2 on that stretch with, wins at Dallas, at Miami, at Sacramento. That they're doing the thing, right? They are doing the thing on the road. And so that's just something you hope it never ends. You hope they can go into Oklahoma City and have another statement win. These road games are not easy. They're playing really quality teams. And if they come out of this stretch, even 10-6, I think that really puts the league on notice. They're on a pace to do better than that right now. And anything better than that, they're almost early in the season kind of staking a really solid claim to that number 1 overall seed. Of course, Denver's got it going, and Denver's not going to let the Wolves get too far away. I think the Wolves have kind of put a sense of urgency on the Denver Nuggets, because Denver knows how important home court advantage throughout the playoffs was for their run last year. I think the Target Center is becoming a place where teams have acknowledged that it's not really a place they want to try to come in and get a win. Definitely don't want to have to come in here and try to get multiple wins in a playoff scenario. But if the Wolves are going to be one of the best home teams in the league and one of the best road teams in the league, that's saying a lot. So the first thing I hope it never ends is the road wins, which is funny because I think the first time we did this segment on the podcast this year, it was a concerning trend after losses at Atlanta and at Toronto to open the season. And now it's like, the road, hope it never ends, right? The another thing that we hope it never ends is Mike Conley staying ageless. And I think Mike Conley's been a part of concerning trends and hope it never ends on one side or the other almost every time we've done this segment this year. But he is the Yoda of the Jedi Council. I mean, he is playing basketball, managing games on a Jedi level, leading the team, leading the locker room, making big shots in the fourth quarter, making big passes, making big defensive plays. what more can you say about Mike Conley? I hope this ageless play continues all the way throughout the rest of the season and into the playoffs. And then the last hope it never ends is I could go with Rudy Gobert. I could go with Anthony Edwards. I'm going to say what I hope it never ends is not player related, but team related. They seem to have really cleaned up the rebounding a lot in recent games, and I hope that's something that never ends. We know how important the rebounding is to this team's success. No matter how good a defense you play, defense isn't done until you've secured your defensive backboard. It's allowing them to get out and run. Hopefully getting out and run allows them to play with a little bit more pace, and hopefully that leads to an uptick in scoring, and they can kind of claw toward being a top 10 in the league offense. And that happens when you defensively rebound the basketball, and they've been doing that better. Again, you can't say enough about going into Sacramento and holding them under 100 points, and that doesn't happen if you're giving up a bunch of offensive rebounds or if you're turning the ball over, and only 12 turnovers and only 8 offensive rebounds given up. Plus your half-court defense and your transition defense. I believe they smashed Sacramento 22-5 in transition points, so just an all-around great defensive game. Protect the ball, rebound the ball, get back in transition, get out in transition after your rebounds. That's how you win at any level. That's how you win at basketball. And so I'm going to go with the final hope it never ends, as I hope the rebounding that the Wolves have gotten a handle on after a little bit of shakiness for a while there, I hope it never ends, that they continue to dominate the glass. And, you can definitely compliment Rudy and in that when you look at, Rudy having 17 rebounds against Sacramento, Kyle Anderson pitching in with 5, Jaden MacDaniels pitching in with 5, Mike Conley giving you 7 rebounds, Ant pitching in with 5. The starters all played big minutes, and the starters took care of the glass, and that's how you win basketball games. So that's concerning trends, and hope it never ends. Tune in next week, and Lance and I will each have 3 more concerning trends, and hopefully we'll still be nitpicking concerning trends and trying to figure out, okay, where can we find something to be concerned about? And hopefully we'll be flooded with hope it never ends. And hey, if you're listening, hit us up on Twitter at Coach Culture 22 and let us know what are some concerning trends you have or some things that you would like us to mention that you hope never ends. Okay, as we close the show, next week, we have 3 games the Wolves do. The road doesn't get any easier. They have to go at Oklahoma City, who's not going to be very happy after losing to the Lakers last night, and a game in which LeBron and Anthony Davis dominated. And then they got the Dallas Mavericks coming into the Twin Cities, coming into Target Center. Dallas is definitely going to be on the revenge game tour after kind of getting dominated down in Dallas. It'll be curious to see if Kyrie's going to be back for that one, if Dallas will come up here in full strength. And then the Lakers are going to be coming back, and I got a sneaking suspicion LeBron is not going to miss 2 games in a row here in Minnesota. The Lakers are still trying to figure out who they are. I predicted before the season started that they might miss the playoffs, and while the national media, because they like to be on the Lakers squirrel collectors nuts, they predicted that the Lakers were going to be a top seed coming off their Western Conference Finals appearance, which I thought was fluky. I always thought it was fluky. I didn't believe in it. I felt like they got good matchups against injured teams or against teams that they just matched up well against. And getting swept by Denver was no surprise to me because I didn't feel like the Lakers should have been there in the first place. And they are stumbling through the season. And so every game that the Lakers play, LeBron is probably going to be trying to not let the season get away from him. So the week doesn't get any easier. The only thing that's nice is you got 2 home games, but neither one of those home games are against slouches. And your road game is against a team that I believe is 3rd in the Western Conference right now. So we've been talking about it for, 2 weeks before everybody else started talking about it. This 16-game stretch against teams that are at or above 500 is not going to get any easier. Many of these games on the road. On Sunday when we have the podcast, we'll talk about the Wolves' first week to start the new year, and that's going to be just, man, the beginning of January if you think the end of December has been something to deal with, wait till you see the beginning of January. It is going to be a gauntlet. And so it doesn't get any easier for the Wolves. And we're going to be here to talk about the previous week's games and preview the next week's games each week here on the Coach and the Culture podcast. Next week we'll be at the Dream Shop, recording on YouTube so that you'll be able to, check out our chicklets live on video and our smiling faces. And until then, have a Merry Christmas. Enjoy this time with your families. Shout outs to our sponsor, the Dream Shop. If you need to get some after Christmas shopping done, head on over to the Dream Shop. Check out Markella, see what she's got for you. 3701 Fremont Avenue North. For Lloyd, super producer Leon Coop. For Lance Gardner, owner proprietor of Yes Trees, I am Coach Frank. We'll be going down to Milwaukee with our Ridgefield basketball team, trying to see if we test our mettle against some Wisconsin teams. So I'm sure I'll have lots to talk about from our trip on next week's podcast episode of the Coach and the Culture podcast. Peace.